Hello, David Pylon, St. Valentinus Gnostic Church, here again to do another video in the continuation of the lecture series. So this time, I previously covered the historic context, some of the rites and rituals of Ascension. This time I wanted to get into the day-to-day life of the church life, what it looked like when they went to church, within the Valentinian and Marcosian traditions. So I might ramble and rant just a little bit. So I talked about before that I'm always kind of reading and studying on this subject and expanding my knowledge. And there's only so much knowledge that we have because it's limited. It's limited to the texts that we do have, many of which are partially destroyed. But there are a few major figures that I went over before, and I'd like to add to that or expand to that because there's Valentinus, who's considered the quote-unquote founder of the Valentinian tradition. And then there's Irenaeus, who's the bishop of the quote-unquote Catholic Church, with a lowercase c, also known as the Proto-Orthodox Church, the mainline Christian Church, what becomes the Catholic Church later on. And then there's Marcus Magus, who's one of the students of Valentinus, who founded Marcosianism. He himself says he was not trying to create a separate religion or church. He was trying to establish a Valentinian Gnostic Church. Valentinus himself, interestingly, was also not trying to create Valentinianism. He was not trying to create his own church religion. He was creating a school within Christian Gnosticism, which he saw as a separate sect or denomination of Christianity in the broader sense. Specifically, I believe he saw it as branching out from Judaism, from Kabbalah, and as kind of like a messianic Jewish mysticism. It's kind of his take on what it was, of his version of Christian Gnosticism, which I believe also incorporated elements of Taoism as well. So he was trying to create that as like a separate school or branch within Christianity, but he saw the other Christians, the Catholics, and them as equal, but just different parts. And Marcus saw them as like just totally separate things. The Valentinus did have another student who I've never brought up before because he's not really talked about a whole lot. He's actually a really major player, it's just that we know nothing about him. And his name was Ptolemaeus, spelled Ptolem. If you type that in, he's going to be like the second person who shows up after like Ptolemy or whatever. But Ptolemaeus was Valentinus' second major student after Marcus, but he becomes his favored student because he takes over the church, actually, or at least we believe so, based on the records we have, that we can assume that, somewhere around the year 165 AD. So Valentinus is still alive and active at this time, but it's towards the end of his life, and then in the last several years of his life, he returns to his home in Rome and is like sick and bedridden. But during this time period, Ptolemaeus becomes the leader of the Valentinian Gnostic Church, at least within what is present-day Italy. And he is known as the Great Systemizer, because what he did is he was a convert. He's like a pagan convert to Christianity, and then he leaves mainline Christianity to join Gnosticism. So what he does is he looks at Valentinianism and Gnosticism in general and tries to connect that back to more broadly Christianity. And he actually does like a lot of very scholarly work. It's 2,000 years old and it's in like the ancient biblical Greek, but it reads almost like you're just reading someone who's like a modern religious scholar going, okay, here's my references. Like he's doing like quotations and in parentheses, and he's just like in footnotes. He's like, okay, this Bible verse says blah blah blah, and this one says blah blah blah, and here's how this connects back to this other idea. And here's my header. Like this will be on the subject of love, and it'll be like, here's the verses on love, here's the Gnostic teachings, so on and so forth. And like he'll break things down like that, and you know, in paragraphs with headers and with everything like laid out and explained with just tons of detail tons of detail and footnotes and references and parentheses and all those kinds of things. It was his writing style, which I appreciate that because I write similarly when I'm doing like scholarly or religious research and writings and things of that nature. And this, like I said, is 2,000 years old in the biblical Greek. But he basically took the traditions and tried to tie them back to mainline Christianity and to the Bible, and tried to say, look, we're all operating within the same broader system. This is why he's called like the systemizer. He's like, I'm creating a system out of what's here. It's part of a bigger system that's what's around it. And so we tried to integrate those things together and try to like make sense of it. To be like, okay, these ideas conflict, these ideas fit together, so we're going to take these parts and put them together and like reject those parts that don't make sense to me or don't add up with what we're saying. So he does that work. And Irenaeus, the Catholic bishop, uses Ptolemaeus' work as one of his primary sources for most of his documents, where he writes against heresies. He says, here's what the Valentinians and Marcosians are, the Gnostics. Here's where they're proof of their evil and blah blah. He's using those documents as like one of his primary sources. His other source is that he had spies within the church, and this is why we know so much about what happened within the Marcosian church, or the sermons that Marcus himself would give, is that Irenaeus had someone who was there, who was watching it, and like writing letters or correspondences back that are sitting against, long distance, long length of time, because this is ancient times, and it's like the length between what is modern day France and modern day Turkmenistan is where these people are separate apart from each other, with Italy and Rome in between them. But they, so we've got these different churches, the Valentinians and Marcosians, that are kind of like separated by space, but they're very similar because they came from the same basic foundings, and because of Irenaeus' hatred of them, we get record of some of what that was like, but it's still kind of incomplete. So then we have to mesh that together with other records, like the Nag Hammadi Library that I talked about. We have Thunder Perfect Mind, which is the poem we attribute to Valentinus. And then we have another document, the Gospel of Truth, some people say is written by Valentinus as well. And then we have basically transcripts of various letters and correspondences that happen between these different figures and each other, where they're kind of like arguing or talking back and forth. We have records of those, and we have some other church documents. And so we kind of got to like piece all of those together to come up with a recreation of, well, this is what we think it was like. This is the best we can come up with. And so that's something I've been looking at and trying to work on is figuring out how did they conduct their church? What exactly did it look like? What things did they do or say, and so on and so forth. As I said before, I try to go back to these source materials when I can, but a lot of what I'm talking about is stuff that I've read other people's writings on the same subjects that they draw from those materials. And sometimes I come to different conclusions than they do when I go back to the original text and say, I'm not sure I come to the same interpretation. So that's why you get like a lot of contradictory information out there about these things. But I've been trying to recreate what that church was like. And sorry, I just went into like a long spiel about it, but I wanted to explain that first. You get an understanding of where I'm getting my information and why there's so much kind of gray area in this subject, where it's like, well, it could have been like this, but it also might have been like that. Some people say it was one way or another. I'm saying basically like these are my best guesses based on everything that I know and what I've read. So when they would start their services, their sermons, so on and so forth, they would do like a song, like a hymn. They would have some type of choir, something like introducing the church when you come in. There's music going on. There would also possibly be incense burning. Now the Valentinians, and we know this because Irenaeus talks about it, and he has a problem with it for some reason. He's just like he just thinks they're like weird. But the Valentinians used I got my balsam incense here. They used the balsam, and in Valentinus's writing, I don't think he was trying to do like anything religious or like specific mystical with it that I can tell or know of. He just says he really liked the scent. He's like, yeah, it smells good. That's my favorite kind of incense to burn. And he says we have to meet the requirement of the commandment raising and pleasing scent to the Lord. Comes from the Old Testament, and he talks about that, and he's like, we don't have the sacrificial altar anymore and all that. We don't have the animal sacrifices going on. So in order for us to still meet this, we have to use incense and candles and holy oil and all these other kinds of things. We're going to have those things on our altars. And he just happened to prefer the balsam wood. So they have that like at the altar at the front of the church, and they would have incense burning, and they would be doing like a song, like a welcome into the church. And as you would go in, and this takes a little, you got to backtrack a little bit. So the Catholic Church, the mainline church, I talked about before, they had hierarchy. It's kind of the definition of where the term Catholic comes from, is it means universal. And it meant universal in the sense of there's one set of rules, it applies to everyone. The universal rule is we operate within a hierarchy. Everyone within that structure knows their roles and responsibilities. That's Catholicism. So within that, the bottom level is the lay persons. That would be like the congregation. Above them is the deacon. Above the deacon is the priest. Above the priest is the bishop. So the Valentinians and the Marcosians copied this practice from them. We believe it was invented by Valentinus himself. Totally subverted this. That they were like, we don't believe in that because it doesn't sound fair. Like, who's to say, in the eyes of God, you're better than me? But they copied it in a kind of like distortion of it, in which they would have people entering the church that would start with the quote-unquote priest or the leader. This would be Valentinus or Ptolemaeus or Marcus, and then their successors, their students after them. And then they would have other people come in after that, and they would have just kind of like an open call of invitation to the church where they allowed everybody. This was something that differed from them, from the other church, from the mainline church. Is one of the things they protest about them is they'd be like, women were welcome, not just men, women. In theory, they don't talk about it a whole lot. If you were like a different sexual orientation, if you're gay or whatever, they would have allowed you as well. Other people of other religions and other denominations, they would have allowed to come in, including people who practice witchcraft. Because this comes up in one of the letters that Irenaeus writes about, protesting against something that happened there. So basically, this is like anyone who wants to come into the church and potentially we can convert and bring to the Lord. They're all welcome here. We don't care. This is one of their, I'm going to talk about later. They have like pillars of the faith, basic teachings that they had, and this was one of them was inclusivity, if I can talk. So they have like this hymn going on and this welcoming into the church, and while that's all going on, they have numbers, and I find this hilarious, and I think they probably did too. I don't think you're supposed to take it 100% seriously, They have numbers that they're offering or giving to people as they're coming in. They'd be like, okay, do you want to participate like directly in the church experience? You're like, here you go. Here's number 2, here's number 3, and so on and so forth. And then they would draw lots. It was like similar to rolling dice, and they would see whose number came up. Or sometimes they just like pull a number out of a hat. It'd be like, okay, number 3 you're the deacon today. Number 5, you're the bishop. Number 7, you're the priest. And they added another role, which I don't know if this is always present, but it was sometimes used. Was they added the prophet, which sounds a little pretentious, but they meant that the role of that person was they were going to speak as the Holy Spirit moved upon them to do so. So they'd be like, okay, you're the prophet. Okay, so today this person, the deacon, is going to come up and read a biblical passage. And this happens once. Is the issue is Irenaeus talks about they welcome like a witch, basically a woman who practiced witchcraft, into the church, and she gets called to go up and read from the Bible, and this is within the broader Judeo-Christian tradition. It was just terrible blasphemy. And their response is basically just like it's the will of God. God determines fate. He determines chance, and so God chose this woman today to come up here and read from the Bible, and so that could get her to convert. Basically, they're like, yeah, this is God's will. If it's God's will that this woman who comes from a different faith or tradition is going to come up here and read our holy scriptures, then that might have a change in her that He has willed to happen. So we're just going to allow that. And you shouldn't be a judge and say like we can't do that because it's bad. So this was an issue that happened that came up specifically in like these letters that we have. But yeah, they would have them do the different roles. The deacon would read from the scriptures. The priest would give a sermon, and the bishop would administer the Eucharist. I believe that was the correct what each of them their roles and responsibilities were. And the prophet at the end, after all this, after the biblical verses and the sermon before the Eucharist, they would ask the prophet, quote unquote, if they had chosen one, if the Spirit moved them. We're like, okay, during all this, we like read these Bible verses and we gave the sermon and so on. Did you hear the Holy Spirit talking to you to like give us a word? The prophet would stand up and either be like, no, not today, or they'd be like, oh yeah, this is what I heard the Spirit telling me. Kind of similar to modern day Pentecostalism in that sense. But they would do that, and then that would happen first, and then afterwards they'd do, okay, we're going to do anything special today. Are we doing like ascension rituals that talked about baptisms and so on and so forth? And then if that wasn't happening, then they'd just be like, okay, we're nearing the end. We'll just like wrap up and then do another song and then leave. Now sometimes within the Valentinian practice, because to Valentinus the 4 classical elements, the earth, wind, fire, water, were very important. Some churches did kind of like an almost pagan practice where they had like 4 candles up at the altar representing the 4 elements. They might have like either one person or different people come up and light them and say like some type of blessing that was connected to that. And it seems to have been kind of like an argument and confusion within the church itself. They're just like what should be on our altar? Should we have both pagan and Judeo-Christian elements? Are they going to fight each other? What is our church? Like that's kind of what they're trying to figure out, because it was all new to them, and they're trying to like make sense of what their own tradition was, what was or was not appropriate. But they generally thought you should have incense and candles and some other various sacraments of the faith. And Valentinus himself talked about this. That he was like, you should always have some things on hand, just in case you need them for various rites and rituals, and for the regular Sunday church service. Which is another thing. is that they seem to have split on what day they should do it. Because some of them, according to some records, went with Saturday service. They went to the more, like Jewish-based. So they're like, okay, we're keeping it on the Sabbath. And that was more popular amongst the Valentinians. And then the Marcosians were like, we're moving to the Sunday, the same as the other Christians. And so it seems to have been like a debate and argument. But you could have gone to a different church somewhere else in a different region and had the leader there of, the opposite faith done it the opposite way. So they're like, okay, well, here we're doing it Saturday, and there they're doing it Sunday. And there never seemed to be like a real agreement on that. We do have one document I talked about before, I believe. That was later on, that was during like the 200s. There was a split between the Eastern and Western Valentinian churches. It's a schism. It's a divide that happens between them. And the Western Church basically writes this letter to the Catholic Church asking to join them. So they're like, we don't want to associate with those other guys anymore, and we also don't want to get killed for being heretics. So could you let us into the main church? The church writes back to them basically, give up everything you believe in and do, and then we can let you. And so we know a little bit about that. I think what their church was based on that. They said they practiced Jewish and Christian traditions combined and did them kind of like at the same time. Like they'd do their church services on the Sabbath, and they would celebrate Jewish holidays, but they would incorporate Christian, Gnostic, and mystic elements into that. So they keep the Jewish calendar and the holidays and the Sabbath and all that as if they were Jewish based, but just make it Christian Gnostic instead. And the Catholic Church said, no, we're not going to allow that. You have to adopt our calendar. You do it on Sunday. Don't celebrate these other holidays. Just do our holidays. And they also said they needed to get rid of their Eastern elements, which we talked about before, that we don't actually know what that is, but we can make some educated guesses. That it seems like they probably practiced yoga. They probably practiced something like Tai Chi and meditation. They absorbed these various things from like Taoism and Hinduism into their practice. And they're like, well, this is just part of our spiritual health. Our physical, mental, spiritual well-being as we do these meditative and kind of like martial arts and so on. Type of practices just to better ourselves and our relationship with God. And the Catholic Church said, no, don't do that anymore either. Cut all that stuff out. And all of these heretical books, burn all of those. You can't keep any of those anymore. Pretty basic stuff. They come in, they light candles and incense. They do the sermon and the scripture reading and all that. Now, whenever Marcus himself would do it, whenever it was his turn, like things were rolled in his favor due to the hand of God or hand of fate, he would do it like all in a very elaborate style. And Irenaeus complains about this. That he talks about like the people who went into his church would just get confused because they'd start like doing prayers and blessings in different languages. And he'd go into like, I'm a man after Marcus's heart. He'd go into really lengthy explanations about the background of everything. Because to him, the primary thing was like your mental understanding. So he teaches all the time, like, you need to understand what's going on here in order to receive the full effect of it. So he'd like just go into, like, if it was his go to administering the Eucharist, he was rolled to be the bishop. He would just go into like a lengthy explanation of like, this is what the blood means, this is what the wine, the blood, this is the bread, the body, this is what they are symbolically. This is what it is to the Jews. This is what it is in Christianity. This is what it is within Gnosticism. He's like, all these ideas are connected. He just like break it down and explain it in length. But before he did it, and some people like that, and then others were just like sitting there like falling asleep, like going like, what is he talking about? That's one of the only big differences there. And like I said, in some of the Valentinians, they would also do lighting candles related to the elements. It had different colors, possibly, because the Gnostics associate different colors with the elements, and they get this from Kabbalah, from the Jewish mysticism, because they're the same as each other. But it would be, I believe if I'm remembering correctly, green is earth, yellow is air, blue is water, red is fire. So it might have been like different colored candles if they could have afforded it, like the wax dyed different colors. That would be up on the altar to light for each of the elements. Yeah, Valentinius talked about before. I kind of sidetracked where my thought process was going there. He talked about before the churches needed to have the different sacraments ready. So we got some of the information, like stuff they would regularly use. He talks about the holy oil, sea salt or kosher salt that's been blessed, and the holy oil is olive oil. That's what they would use to burn in their lamps, which are the menorah. Hold on, I got one. I'll show you here. That's what they look like. So they fill this with oil, and they have a like a thread, a twine that sticks down in there, and like that. That's what menorah originally were oil lamps. Then they become the other version you can see behind me back there, where we put the candles in them. But you need the olive oil that's been blessed, and you need sacramental wine, and kosher salt or sea salt, and possibly also additionally some candles, and the oil lamps, and the balsam incense that he preferred, and possibly also some other sacred herbs. He mentions that any other sacred herbs that you might need to burn to raise a pleasing scent to the Lord. And you'd have an altar at the front of the church, and in Marcus's church, I talked about this before with the rites and rituals. There was lots of curtains. He was big on curtains. He wanted them all over the whole temple. It was just like, close this curtain, open it back up, close this curtain, open it back up. And he said it was all symbolic. That it was like, layers of illusion and reality. This is what he was doing. It was all kind of like a magic show almost, except meant to be like spiritual and symbolic and educating you as to what was going on. Valentinius that we know of wasn't as big on that. He did have some of it. And it was mainly just at the front where the altar was, and around the bridal chamber that I talked about before, which you were only allowed to enter in like the final step of the ascension, where you go face yourself in the bridal chamber. But other than that, the way they had it set up was they had one side is where like the pews or the chairs are, and the other side they had a table, which is where they would administer the Eucharist, and it's also where they do kind of like these performances of the Last Supper. They're probably like the rites and rituals as well. And so there are similarities and differences between just like normal service and doing like these specific rituals that were your ascension into the, or through the church. As far as did they have like monks or nuns or anything like that, we don't know. Some people say no, they didn't. Other people say yeah, they probably did. Because they talk about something called church marriage, and we don't understand what that is. They're saying you're married to the church, and we're just like, does that mean you're celibate? Does it mean you're like a nun or a monk? and we don't know for sure. And they would say that was something separate and different. Like you had to make that as a personal decision if you were going to do that or not. As you were going through this ascension process, as you were becoming a church member and then like going up through these levels, they would ask you if you were went into like do the church marriage or get married to the church or whatever or not, or if you were more just kind of I'm gonna ascend and then I'm gonna go elsewhere and do other things, which they kind of expected if you reached the end of the process you were gonna become like some kind of a missionary or minister. But I think it probably is kind of like a celibate thing the way they're talking about it, because it kind of sounds like it's either get married, like have a spouse, or do this. It's one or the other. And within Marx's tradition, Marcosianism, that was not the case. It was an option. It was available to you because it does get mentioned. So that's why I think it was more just like a voluntary thing. That they were like, yeah, you can become a nun or a monk or whatever if you want to, and become celibate. You don't have to do that. It's just if God calls you to do that, you go do it. But it's not a requirement of the church. Valentinus apparently wrote a letter to Marcus because I mentioned, I think in the first video, the first or second video, that Marcus kept getting into like scandals, and he was accused of like sexual misconduct. So he was this kind of controversial figure. And Valentinus writes him this letter where he says, you should get married. You should find a wife so people stop accusing you of like sleeping around. It's bad for the faith. So that happens. That's the thing. But other than that, pretty normal standard stuff like intro song, exit song. I'm trying to remember if I'm forgetting anything here important. Different stuff on the altar in different churches if they couldn't decide exactly how that should be set up. There wasn't a set standard per se. There was a general idea of what they were doing. The baptism, I talked about this before. So in Marcus's church, and then Marcosians who followed his example afterwards would have had like a separate bathhouse. It was outside the temple. It's in front of the temple, and it's supposed to symbolize like the womb. So you're getting reborn through the waters, and then coming out and going into the church. And Valentinus, for the Valentinian tradition, just had like a bowl of water up at the front of the church with the altar, next to the altar, or with it, probably next to it, was just like a bowl of holy water. It's been blessed and mixed with the blessed kosher salt or sea salt in order to make it holy water. And so that would be at the front of the church and like a fountain next to the altar. So very, very similar in some ways to modern day Catholicism. That was their basic church setup. I think I covered all the major points, like what it was like when they were just like going into church. I did forget some things. Okay. There were some other things. Within Marcosian tradition, Marcus does set up a separate tradition in which those who were fully ascendant, who had gone through the whole process, would have meetings. There'd be secret meetings with him or other successors of him after him within the church, where they would talk about like basically like magic. They would teach each other magic basically. They just kind of like sit around and talk about it, and they'd be led by him. And his role or the role of Marcosian priest to replace him within the Marcosian tradition is interesting because it's referred to as the master of ceremonies. He's the MC. I find funny. It's interesting. It's more like he's a conductor of what's going on more than just a priest. And so when you were a Marcosian priest, you ended up taking on like multiple titles, like Marcus did. It was like, okay, I'm a magician. I literally practice magic tricks. I'm also an MC. I'm a master of ceremonies, and I'm a priest. But all these things are like separate and connected at the same time within this tradition, and not necessarily within others, because he absorbed the mystery cults. He absorbed elements of that into what he was doing, which is what kind of separated him from his master and teacher, Valentinus. So that is one difference. Something else that happened is that there were some of them that were smaller churches that didn't necessarily do it in the temple with all the big rituals, and this became more common as they became more persecuted. Irenaeus talks about this some, that he felt like the Gnostics were not real Christians because he didn't see them as persecuted as the other Christians were. He was like, they're not getting fed to the lions. We don't know if that's really fair and accurate, but part of that might be that the Romans themselves didn't always know, and we know it's because they had these letters that they would write to each other where they would arrest people, and they'd have like they'd have someone like Valentinus in prison, and they'd write a letter and be like, should we kill this guy? Should we feed him to the lions? And then, like, a general or emperor or whoever would write back and be like, I don't know. Just let them go to be safe because we're not really sure if they're real Christians or not. And Valentinus himself talked on this, that he said, like, be shrewd in your dealings. Like, you meet someone who hates the Christians, tell them you're Gnostic because they don't understand what a Gnostic is. And if you meet someone who hates the Gnostics, tell them you're a Christian. So he was like, yeah, don't be a martyr. Was kind of his take on it. And so this might be why it seemed like they got martyred less, was they were against the idea. And so they tried to use their words to deceive people who tried to capture and put them to death. They were good at lawyering their way out of it. But once they do become more persecuted, which is interesting, when the Roman Empire converts to Christianity is when they started getting like the biggest, like, okay, we're going to go, if those guys are heretics, we're going to go get them. Then they emigrate, they leave out of the area, they move to France and Ireland and places like that, and they start having these meetings that are in secret, that are inside of like caves in hills and mountains and places like that, or mounds under the earth, where they're going to start teaching these mystical secret teachings without getting arrested and killed. And so the church structure does change because of that. And we end up with some like medieval European documents in which descendants or survivors of that carry forward some of their knowledge that gets mixed in with European paganism and Christian mysticism to create kind of new traditions that also form our ideas of, well, that this is kind of similar in some ways what they might have been teaching or practicing. We can't know for sure because it's been filtered so much through other cultures and through time. I think I covered all the major bases. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you for watching. Be blessed.